me tonight. And just a quick word while some other people are joining. Of course, this interview, the audio and video, will be available on the YouTube channel following the interview tonight. Other interviews that are like this, the live interviews, they're all available on the YouTube channel. And of course, the regular podcast will come out on Tuesdays. In fact, James Thompson's interview came out this morning. Bria Schoenberg, episode 99 comes out next week. And then episode 100, Wayne Bergeron, comes out at the end of February. So those are some other interviews to look forward to. And so it looks like we've got some people joining in. This is a great time to welcome Chris Gekker. Chris, it's a pleasure to see you tonight. How are you?
Fine, Larry. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. A couple of tech issues. We didn't get a chance to actually meet formally before this, but of course, I know who you are. You're kind of a big deal, in the trumpet world, wouldn't you say?
I'm not sure.
Well, I think a lot of people would argue that you definitely are. I've got a couple of your books, like many people, but the first time I ever heard you play live, and you might not appreciate me bringing this up, but it was the San Antonio ITG, and I think you were suffering with the flu or something. Do you recall that?
Yes, I had that weekend. I remember I was watching the NBA Finals on Saturday night and felt very strange late at night and went to bed and was shivering. I just caught a chill. And the next day, just tried to get through the day. And I remember, in fact, working outside some, and I just had a really bad fever. Well, I was supposed to fly to San Antonio on Wednesday, and just sort of toughed it out. And but when I arrived in San Antonio, my fever was over 103. And I was concerned. So I checked in the hotel, and I was advised to go straight to the hospital. I went to the emergency room, and I was in the emergency room about 5 to 6 hours. They had me hooked up to all kinds of fluids and such. I was given, they tried very hard to figure out what I had. They couldn't come up with anything. It was just some sort of strange bug. This was several years ago, and in this modern time, what a sort of a scary thought. But at that time, I just in any case, they sort of knocked it out of me, but I was very, very weak. And then the next day, I played Jim Stevenson's Concerto Road Home, which I was to premiere with the Air Force Band. And the next day, tried the rehearsal, and I felt fine. And then the next day was a concert, and it's fine is relative. I could play. I had to play sitting on a stool. It's some piece with some high notes and such. But I was thankful that I think it went very well. I've played it since then, and I did a class then too. It was a great experience. I saw a lot of old friends there. But yeah, I was very, very hit hard by this. In fact, I remember walking home from the emergency room back to the hotel, which was about a 10-minute walk, and it took me about 40 minutes. I had to really stop every 20 yards and just sort of gather myself. So yeah, that was that.
Well, I remember you sounded fantastic, and I think like a lot of us were like, how in the world are you even managing? Because I'll be honest, you didn't look like you felt great, kind of pale, but holy cow, you brought it, if you're just running off adrenaline or, I think we all know how that feels. But
I still had the IVs, my arm was bandaged up because I basically had needles in me for 5 hours. And
wow. Yeah. Well, and thinking about that band that accompanied you, they sounded fantastic too.
What an organization it is. The whole concert, they were just phenomenal. And we had a University of Maryland clarinetist in the band. I had coached an ensemble she was in just the year before in L'Histoire. In fact, she had a young baby at the time. When you're coaching chamber music, your job is to do whatever is most useful. And I actually babysat while they were rehearsing. But yeah, she was in the band, and they're phenomenal. We had the trumpet section. My gosh, yeah, it was a great band.
It's funny. Everybody talks about the premier bands, the DC bands, but I think every military band that I've heard has just been top shelf.
Oh yeah, it's such a culture, and the standards they hold themselves to, the sense of duty and pride they take in the ceremonial duties. No one who how do I put this? Unless you're a trumpet player who's had to play taps outside in a certain environment, and the meaning of doing that, no one will ever understand what that means, and it's quite something. So when we see these great trumpeters fulfill these duties, and then all the other things they do, it's just, I was raised in that environment. I mean, I was born in Washington, D.C., and raised listening to military bands, and it is its own culture, and it's an amazing sort of environment, and the population of artists, that not just trumpet players, I mean other instruments too, but it's quite something. Yeah.
Well, and it's funny to even look at like the Marine Band as kind of the stepping stone for all these great artists that come out. Tom Hooten, Nancy Taylor, all these other just terrific. Yeah. Well, and of course I'm mentioning trumpet players because that's what I know. But
yeah.
So you mentioned chamber music, which I think you might know a little bit something about. And of course, I'm thinking about ABQ. Could we talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So was it 17 years? Is that right? That you were
18. It was 18 years I was there. Yeah.
I didn't mean to shortchange you on that. I hope that doesn't affect your retirement with them. Yeah. How did you first get into that group?
Well, it's interesting. I had actually, right at the end of my senior year of college at Eastman, I won a national audition for the Kansas City Philharmonic. This was 1976. That was a full-time orchestra then. It was a big audition. And so I went there and I was there for 3 years. And it was a phenomenal job to have for experience. But I also came to the realization during my 3 years there that I did not want to be in an orchestra full time. And I was very grateful for the job, believe me.
Mm-hmm.
But and I love playing an orchestra. I mean, I do it, a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But there was just something about the dynamic of doing it all the time that I wasn't ready for it then. I had a great time. I had nothing but friends there. I'm still close to people that I was in the orchestra with, but it's just not what I wanted to do. So I left after 3 years. Now, 2 years after I left, they folded in 1981. I left in 79. They folded in 81. Thankfully, there is now the Kansas City Symphony, which is an excellent orchestra. It's an entirely different organization and doing very well. It's a great city. It's a great place. Anyway, so I was back in the DC area. I was doing several things. I was playing a lot of shows. I've always been a big theater player. The University of Maryland at the time, I had been offered they had a faculty brass quintet. Now, I was not on the faculty, but I was in the faculty brass quintet with the trumpet professor Emerson Head, who had been my teacher in high school. And we were quite active. And I was playing DC was a busy place to play. And I was also working during the day. I mean, I had a day job with a printing company that was owned by my sisters. I drove a delivery truck and worked on Harris Offset Press and did things. It was just a very busy time, and I was happy. I mean, I was in my mid-20s, and it was just a very active time. Anyway, so one day I'm at the printing company. I'm working the press. I've got a job on. I've got apron to work with ink and stuff like that. And this is in the days before answering machines or cell phones, certainly. And back in those days, when you tried to reach somebody, you just called around, So anyway, I got a phone call, and it was Ray Mace, and he said, "This is Ray Mace from American Brass Quintet. We have a trumpet opening, and we'd like to ask you if you'd like to audition." And they had already been holding a lot of auditions. Now, I had been active in various situations, and I had done a recording with someone who had been in the Canadian Brass. And, he had told Ray, there might be someone else you might want to listen to. And so Ray, well, how do you reach me? I don't have a common last name. So he, looking in the Washington, D.C. area, looking in the phone book, he found my mother's phone number, called her up, and she said, well, you might be able to catch him here or there. And she gave him like 2 or 3 numbers that he might be able to catch me. So Ray's calling around and got a hold of me, and it was good. The shop was noisy. I'll never forget that. He said, like, is this Chris Gekker? I said, yeah. He says, the trumpet player? I said, yeah. He says, where am I calling? I said, well, it's kind of hard to Anyway, they invited me to come up, and they had been, like I said, been holding auditions, and they gave me a list of pieces to be ready to do, and it was a long audition. Anyway, and I was maybe it was like 10 days later. I remember catching the shuttle to New York. I was working like all the time, so this was like a day off to me. I remember getting up at 5 and going to the airport, and I flew in and landed at LaGuardia, and I took a bus in to Grand Central, and I just walked to the Ansonia Hotel. So Grand Central is 34th on the east side, and I walked to 74th and Broadway. Just such a beautiful day. I just to me it was like, hey, it's a day in New York, and wow, this is cool. And New York is the greatest place in the world to take a walk in. It's just it is a great place. And so it was like a 2-hour audition. I played some Ernest Williams duets with Ray in front of the other people in the quintet. We played Renaissance, we played Ewald, we played Ingolf Dahl, we played Elliott Carter. At the very end, they said, can you play some A2? I played a Bosquet A2. I remember played Bosquet number 8, and they said, we'd like to offer you the job. And later, Ray, the guy said, actually, after you and Ray played a couple duets, we had already decided, but then it turned into just playing with them for like 2 hours. So very exciting. And I came to New York, and I didn't start working in all around New York. I did the quintet stuff, but I still had a lot of obligations in New York, in Washington, so I would go back and forth a bit. But I remember I started in the studio scene pretty quickly, and there was a TV show, Nurse, with Michael Larned, who was the female star of the Waltons. I remember she was the headline. So I'm in a studio. This is about 2 months later, and I'm sitting in between Jerome Ashby on horn from the New York Philharmonic, and on the other side of me is Dave Bargeron on trombone from the Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And it went well, and they hired me for the whole year. And I was just like thinking to myself, 2 months ago I was driving a delivery truck. I was a confident trumpet player, and I certainly practiced all the time, but very grateful for that opportunity. And I always say, people, if I had a lot going on here, there was stuff growing in this area, I would have been just fine. But it was a great chance and opportunity, and led to a lot. And American Brass Quintet is an amazing ensemble with an amazing history, like a very unique kind of history, really a composer-driven group that doesn't play transcriptions, plays original music. Within a year, I was, on the Great Wall of China with them, and lots of recordings, and it's really a critically acclaimed group. In other words, it's a brass quintet because we're always playing, Charles Warren, Ned Rorem, Jacob Druckmann, or historically informed versions of early music. So the critics pay a lot of attention to the group, and very grateful for that time. And Ray Mace, one of the great trumpet players who's ever lived, just to sit next to him. And the way the quintet works, as it's always worked, it's the two trumpet players 50-50. You play first and second, back and forth. It's considered a team effort. But what a colleague to have, all of them, everyone. But
sure.
But Ray is just really one of a kind. So yeah.
How active was that group when you joined?
Well, it's not full time. In other words, when you join the American Brass Quintet, you have other things to do. But I preferred that. We would have 2 tours a year, one in the fall, one in the spring. We had teaching. When I joined the group, it came with a teaching job, being at Brooklyn College at that time. Eventually, with the group, and as a private teacher, was teaching at Juilliard. In my years in New York, also had faculty positions at the Manhattan School of Music and Columbia University, but with the quintet, where I both coached chamber music and taught private, it was Juilliard. So you had that, and then Summer Aspen Music Festival. So you had those teaching jobs. So you had a tour in the spring, a tour in the fall. You had a recital series at Carnegie Recital Hall, and then various times you do a couple days quickly here or there. I mean, some of them are nuts. I mean, we once flew to Italy, played a concert, and we're back within 24 hours to the United States, and so sometimes it was kind of crazy like that. But yeah, and a fair amount of recording. Again, composer driven. We had a lot of offers to go sort of a little bit more commercial, and the group just had a very, very strong profile. Now, nothing again. I'm as commercial a trumpet player as you're going to ever meet. I mean, you won't find anyone who's played more rodeos than me and things like that. And I played a lot of rock, and I've been very involved with jazz over the years. But in the quintet, I really enjoyed that exclusive focus on the art of the composer, which to me is a big, big, important and thing in my musical life, and it's been ever since, because I've been involved with composers, constantly, not just with quintet, but in every sort of situation, sonatas for trumpet, piano, or chamber pieces with violin, trumpet, piano, things like that.
Well, I think that's the identity of the group, right? I mean, Canadian Brass had their identity. They had a very specific thing, a look as well as a sound. The same with Empire, right? There was a definite look as well as a sound and a vibe with all those,
Oh, it's phenomenal. I mean, Canadian, I got to record them in Toronto once, and what they did was just so honest and so much integrity. It really was their persona as artists, and you couldn't do it otherwise, and done beautifully. Empire was like the Fab Five. I mean, the amount of the sheer weight and power and mastery they brought to stuff, just mind-boggling. So I feel like the three groups never existed in the same world, and for that reason, it is something to celebrate. That
absolutely
the individual, and it was. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure some people, like to get into sort of competitive stuff, but just the quality was just so high and individual, and not just those three. I mean, the Meridian group, which was really born in our brass chamber class at Juilliard, was a group like none other, and there are many, and there's a number of other groups as well.
Right. Well, and you mentioned that group, and I'm thinking Kevin Cobb was between both those, wasn't he? In Meridian and ABQ.
Well, Kevin took my place when I left ABQ in '98, and a marvelous player. I mean, what an artist he is. I know Kevin. I just spoke to him the other day, but I'm not sure of the timeline. I'm sure you know.
It's been a few years.
Meridian for me was, at school was, John Kelly and Rich. I mean, John Nelson and Rich Kelly. I mean, and that group, and them playing the Etler and then the Zappa stuff. I mean, it was off the chain. I mean, the way they played.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I agree with you that the identity between those three groups, the difference, we should celebrate that, because the brass world needed that. We needed all these different examples right? Because still, you look at the repertoire we have, we're still kind of in the infancy of brass quintet repertoire. There's still so many transcriptions, so many arrangements, and very, very little original.
For good reason. I mean, brass can really, just sound so amazing in so many contexts. I think that I want to really devote myself to what composers do. I mean, to me, it's, I used to joke sometimes, the American Brass Quintet, we were responsible for hundreds of premieres, and the number I can't remember anymore, but let's just pick a number. Let's say it's 250 premieres. And I used to joke that, well, 200 of those were both first and last performances. But that's no reason to stop. I mean, to me, there's nothing. I still get very excited if I'm at a concert of new music, and what's the first note I'm going to hear? What's the second note? I mean, to me, it's still like a cause for wonder, and I really will never get over that. I mean, to me, I wish I was a composer. I'm not. I don't have that in me, but I sort of live vicariously through composers. So the solo CDs I've done have all been composer-driven projects where the point is not me as a trumpet player, but these pieces. That's what really excites me and inspires me.
Mm-hmm. Looking over here to see if there are any comments yet. Not yet. So I'm thinking ABQ. You've got you can't sub out in these groups, right? I mean, you've got to commit to that. But that's another reason that these groups are so successful. You look at that original group with Canadian Brass, the original, Empire. They did shuffle around a little bit early on, but that really does say something to the effectiveness of a group when you can get that. Who you're sitting down next to. There's a trust in how people play, right? And it's not a predictability, not in a bad way, right?
Right. In some ways, there's a certain point where repetition becomes the foundation for more creativity. When it's like there's sort of a subconscious intuition you get when you've gone down a road many times that allows for a kind of spontaneity. It's a very hard thing to describe, but it's there. And yes, it was. And as a working musician, sometimes all of us had stories of what we've given up to stay in the group. A TV show or a Broadway show or something like that might have been very lucrative, but because it conflicted with something in the quintet, and the quintet stuff was untouchable. Now, I was not really a freelancer in New York City. I had 3 major jobs: the quintet, the Orchestra St. Luke's, which I was principal trumpet, which included the St. Luke's Chamber Ensemble, and that group did tons of recordings, and then Orpheus, where Ray Mason and I functioned as co-principals, and that group, particularly in the mid to late 80s and early 90s, recorded a tremendous amount. So, and those 3 groups sort of put their schedules, I'm not sure, don't know if there was conscious effort, but the schedules sort of fit as a puzzle. So between the 3, I was always booked. It's like I was never like waiting for the phone to ring, gee, what am I going to do? There was always stuff to do. Now, on top of that, I did other things quite frequently. I had a lot of studio work. Now, the studio scene in New York really sort of faded out toward the late 80s, but there was a time when it was really hopping, TV shows, jingles, commercials, movie soundtracks. So I did a lot of that. I played a lot with the New York Philharmonic. I mean, I played quite a bit with them, and then Chamber Society of Lincoln Center, which I played quite a bit with. So those things, yeah.
When you walk into the New York Phil, and you've probably done offstage principal for second, third. I mean, have you done every position when you go into that, or do they call you specifically for principal?
Different stuff. I did. So I did take Phil's place at times on subscription series too for principal. Played second to him a number of times, and then I remember live at Lincoln Center broadcast where we did the 4 trumpets playing Tchaikovsky fifth. So he and I was his assistant. I was Robin to his Batman on first trumpet, so to speak. And then I can remember playing fifth trumpet on Mahler 6 and various things like that. So yeah, Mahler second, the recording with Leonard Bernstein for Deutsche Grammophon, Johnny Ware and I playing off stage, and yeah. So
what was it like sitting between Phil and Joe Alessi?
Well, no one sits, but they sit next to each other.
Oh well, I thought maybe as an assistant you were sitting. Yeah.
Yeah, Joe was an old friend. I mean, not this past summer, the summer before last, we did a quintet together in Canada, and with Stefan Dorr, the principal horn of Berlin. That was quite a quintet to be in. Sergio Carlino on tuba, fantastic virtuoso tuba player, and Joe is amazing. Yeah, it's interesting, the Philharmonic. I mean, it's like it's like no one is really seems to be working very hard, but there's this massive sound that you're in. So it's like a combination of sort of, it feels kind of like no one's working. Well, I'm not going to use the word effortless because people are serious and working, but it just flows, and there's just, I think we have 104 people, each person in the entire orchestra is a world-class virtuoso. So 104 people playing piano with that quality of sound. It's piano. I mean, it's soft, but there's just such a body to it that once you're sitting there, it's just like, it's hard to kind of put into words.
Yeah. Did you ever sub into the Met?
No. Mark Gould, one of my best. Mark, one of the most influential trumpet players to me, and learned a lot from him. I think at his peak, he was the most colorful orchestral player I've ever heard in my life. And I did jazz recordings with him. He and I recorded with Billy Joel. I mean, did a lot with Mark over the years, and I consider him like a teacher. I mean, just working with him. The things he would say offhand, still stuff stays with me to this day. Very influential on me. But I never. I mean, it just wasn't appropriate. I mean, a lot of people were already there, established principal at the Met, and it's just a different dynamic. I was never looking for it either. I mean, I certainly went to the Met to listen. I'll never forget going to hear him play like a Mozart opera, and I had never heard such a sound on a rotary trumpet, and if Mozart, there's nothing that stands out so much, but it was the sound and the presence he had. And I remember I called him. I went back and talked to him because I was playing a lot of rotary too, and he showed me some of his setup stuff. And
I'm excited. I get to talk to him. I think we set a date in March. I can't remember. Maybe it's April, but I'm going to have him on.
Mark is, I mean, he's sort of well known for a certain kind of brusqueness, I guess you'd say. But he's really the most generous people I've ever met in terms of he'll give of himself as a teacher. It's just sometimes, it'll have a kind of a bite to it. I sometimes think, because he's really a guru. It's sort of like if like Yoda was a New York cab driver or something like this.
Yeah.
It's like these great pearls of wisdom, but they're sort of snapped at you.
Yeah. Well, it might be a risk, going live, but I'm willing to take that risk. So I've got a comment here in the chat, and this is from Akira Miratani. Akira is a friend of mine, colleague. Akira plays with the Fort Wayne Philharmonic. Really fine trumpet player, super nice guy. But he says, "Hey, Larry, Chris, this is Akira, one of Chris' past students from Stony Brook. Do you remember Akira?"
Oh, sure I do. Okay. Yeah, very much.
Yeah, he still practices your etudes and drills, and they always get him into great shape. I would agree with that. Let's see, what else does he get? I really don't know what Chris did, but he corrected my musical faults. So grateful because I can feel the music that way. Yeah.
I didn't have a sense of that at the time, Akira. I was only at Stony Brook 1 year and really enjoyed the brief time we had working together very much.
Well, you'll enjoy this. I'm not sure when Stony Brook was, but I was playing with the Fort Wayne Philharmonic. I was subbing up there, and Akira switched to playing left-handed. And I can't remember why exactly he did that, but he's still, after all these years, playing left-handed. And I think it was, well, maybe he'll chime in and let us and remind me exactly why he did that. But
I once had really injured my right hand badly, and I had to play a few concerts left-handed. It can be done. That's always a funny thing with Wynton. Wynton, who has finger dexterity like from another planet, in addition to everything else. And then you'll be working with him, and he's playing, and then someone comes up and asks for an autograph, and he signs it, and he's left-handed. So it's always like people look like, oh, okay.
But that reminds me, these are some techniques that I had learned from some other teachers, but I call them distractionary techniques. Like, if you have a difficult passage that you're working on, is to change things up and play it left-handed, or to play it standing on one foot, right? So that you're distracting one side of your brain. Have you ever engaged any kind of teaching tool like that?
It's something similar. I like to take away visual. In other words, I don't like the idea of playing with eyes closed, but I like to get in a room with no light, or it's like we have these five senses, and if we take one sense away, the others get sharper. And if we take our sight away, I think our ears get sharper. Now, I'm not saying that that's something I can scientifically, quantify, but I know when I can play an etude by memory and play it without looking at anything, I'm hearing it in a more intense way than when I'm reading the page. Having said that, it's very important to be able to look at music and play well while you're looking at music too, for sure.
Yeah, I'm still working on that side of things. Yeah, Akira mentioned some of your books, and I think one of the things that I appreciated, and I don't remember which order I got them in, but endurance drills, or one of those, that scales. I mean, it was just a new way to think about scales, and it made it enjoyable again. And I appreciated that. It's like Scott Belk's flexibility books, right? Which I think he's very happy that that you had said something about those books. But it's something new, and it doesn't cheapen the technique, right? It enhances this. It gives us just one more tool to get the job done.
Yeah, and fundamentals is where it's at. I mean, the longer you play, the more important they are. I mean, it's just like, yeah. There's a quote in my slow practice book. There's some quotes in the back, and it's one by Michael Jordan. He's talking about basketball, but he just is talking about, the minute you get away from fundamentals, man, this is not a good move, And I've always been a big eavesdropper, and listening to, Phil Smith, listening to Alan Dean, listening to Mark Gould, listening to Ray Mace practice. I could give you stories of them working basics to a level that is beyond description, and they're playing these basics, and they're reaching for like an internal kind of intuitive understanding, which is just it's magical to watch.
Well, but you must have already had something very much like that in place, or you wouldn't have been at that level that you were at as early as you were.
Well, these books you mentioned, and they're published by Charles Coleman, but I wrote them for my, I rarely had regular private lessons ever. That teacher I had in high school, Emerson Head, was great inspiration. He was like an uncle to me. He had been solo cornet in the great Michigan band under Ravelli, and I still never ever heard a trumpet player play like the Bellstedt solos the way Emerson Head could. And but I would write a lot of my own exercises out, even back then. I mean, the stuff that's in the books is like the tip of the iceberg. So, I'd also been an athlete. So, I on a basketball court, I would say to myself, I need to be able to move to my left, and I would, with a dribbling, and I would make up exercises and drills for myself. So same on the trumpet, I would say to myself, if I play a really high, loud, high note, and can I immediately then play a soft, low note? If I tongue very loud and low register, can I immediately tongue pianissimo on the high register? So I would write all these drills out. I would create a scenario and then write an exercise or an etude about that scenario. And the first book that was published was Articulation Studies. And I had just been carrying around a stack of these exercises for my students. And it was actually Mark Gould who, he'd seen, someone had shown them to him, and he called up Dr. Charles Coleman and Alan and Liz over there. They had their store on 53rd Street, and he said, you guys should print this. And so Alan called me up, and I brought him in, and I didn't put him in. I wrote a little forward to it, where I related the 1-minute drill that I'd learned from my teacher at Eastman, Sidney Muir, who had been a student of Herbert Clark's, and he had told me this drill from Herbert Clark. And so that's how that book came about. At the time, I wasn't thinking, I've got a book. My thought, gee, I just don't have to go to Kinko's anymore. Someone else is going to make copies for me. Yeah, so that's where they come from. And just this past December, they came out with another one called Focal Point Exercises, which I'm very excited about. I find it to be a very helpful and significant kind of protocol.
See, I don't need to know that. I don't need to know that there's yet another book available out there. And my wife might be watching this interview right now, and she'll probably agree. Um, it's funny. I just went to thinking about all the books that we amass over our career, and my students right now. I ask them to go buy something. I'm going to throw my students under the bus right now, and they're like, oh, "I don't have the money. Can you just give me a copy?" And I'm like, "If you knew." Yeah, and we have the ability to digital download books, right?
Yeah.
Q Press, I think, is one of my favorite sites lately. But do you remember, a teacher would say, "I want you to get this book," and you'd have to call the local music store, and they'd place an order, and it might be 2, 3, 4 weeks, right, before the book would come in,
Yeah.
if they didn't have it in stock. And I remember, uh, it's you did what you had to do to get a hold of the book. And I'm thinking, well, it's kind of like with recordings, right? I mean, everything's at your fingertips literally now. But uh, yeah, I kind of wish that your students still had to work as hard as we did to build that collection of books and LPs, right? Albums.
I hear you, and I agree. I'll say the same thing. They've got other things that we didn't have to worry about.
Yeah.
So maybe it balances out.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking about going to the listening library, right? I mean, this was, I don't remember if it was a card catalog, but I mean, do you remember doing this where you'd get an assignment the first thing I ever remember was actually the oh my gosh, I'm blanking on this. Oh man, I can't edit. This is live too. He recorded all the cornet solos, and then he was a conductor of the Seattle.
George
Sym-
Ford. George
Thank you,
Ford.
thank you. Right,
Was,
so
was
that
my,
was
sorry.
yeah. No, that was the first thing that I ever checked out at a college music library, and oh my gosh, my eyes were opened
George
on
Schwartz,
that.
George Schwartz was my last teacher, and I was already working professionally. But
Yeah.
my biggest influence, and my the I still learn. In the summers, the normal summer, I'm at the Eastern Music Festival where he's music director. I still learned so much from him, and he was the most inspiring musician I've ever been around, in not only trumpet but in every way.
Well, it's not fair to get that good on trumpet and then just leave and go do something else.
Well, Jerry is like no one has ever been. It's just we could spend the whole show on him.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just
Yeah.
like someone from another world, really.
I want to go back to something you said very early on, and you were talking about that first orchestra job out in Kansas, and you said, I wasn't quite ready for that. Can you explain a little bit what you meant by you weren't ready for that?
It was the it was a heavy workload. I mean, we worked a lot, and we toured, and often on buses, and it was playing a lot. I remember one year we did Schubert Ninth. I don't know how many times. It could have been 30 or 40 times, and it was a grind. At the same time, there were great musicians there, and the people I met, very inspiring. One of the trumpet players was Dick Smith, who was in the later stages of his career, certainly, but he had been principal trumpet in Cleveland before Adelstein, and Dick was George L had picked him to primarily play the Beethoven, Brahms, Schumann, Wagner, Richard Strauss, and I think it was he joined the orchestra in the late 50s, and he served as principal for just some years, and then Adelstein was brought in, and I think the repertoire got a lot wider then. Mm-hmm. But Dick brought something so special. He's the principal trumpet on their Schumann Symphony Cycle with Zell, and that's one of the greatest examples of that sort of early romantic, how a trumpet functions in an orchestra, the warmth. He played almost everything on B flat. And the warmth, and the Bruckner third they did is Dick playing for principal on a rotary B flat, and it might be the first rotary trumpet performance with a major orchestra in American orchestras. And I think Bruno Walter doing Bruckner Ninth with the Columbia Orchestra, which was both a New York and an LA orchestra, but Bruno Walter recorded Columbia with out in LA, also late 5960 or something like that. But and those were rotaries, I've been told. But anyway, so when I say I wasn't ready, it's no reflection on anyone there in the job. I was young. I was the youngest person in the orchestra, and again, everyone was very nice to me. But it was just I just wasn't ready for that kind of job where you go to the same seat day in and day out. And I've always liked, even when I was in Kansas City, I started playing. I've been playing jazz since I was little, and I was working in a local jazz scene, and there's some great jazz musicians in Kansas City, and I don't know. It's a hard. I can't really say what I meant, but I needed sort of to play more different things, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I guess it can be a grind too, unless you're a a New York Phil where you're doing maybe 2 or 3 different programs a week, right?
Well,
you've got some variety.
That is a heavy workload too, and until you've done that, and trumpet players have to understand the difference between the different sizes of the orchestra. Like playing principal in a 75-piece orchestra is so different than playing principal in a 104-piece orchestra. And it's almost like a boxer being a light heavyweight versus a heavyweight. And I felt like, I always felt good in the New York Philharmonic, and they were very friendly to me and very nice. But I always felt like if I was going to be in there all the time, which I never was going to be, I would have to make certain adjustments because like at Eastern in the summer, I'm principal trumpet of that orchestra, which is 70-piece. And we play, we finished 2 summers ago, we finished with Alpine Symphony and played big Mahler 6, played a lot of big stuff. But it's different playing Mahler 6 or Alpine in a 75-piece orchestra versus a 104-piece orchestra. And until you've sat in that chair, you don't really know. It can't really be described. It's just different, I can tell you that. And it's not a question of just one's louder than the other. It's different.
Yeah, well, I think about some of the regional orchestras that I play with. We don't even come close. We might get close to 70, 75 musicians, but most of the time, probably in the 50s or 60s, right? And so it's a challenge not to but we don't do a lot of big Mahler pieces in those orchestras, mainly because it's just we're not together enough to really bring that together.
A very large body of work I did in New York was with St. Luke's and Orpheus, where was much more common to be in the 35, 40, even 20-piece, doing Pulcinella, Haydn symphonies, just things like that. And I always loved that because it's very healthy. I mean, you can just play sort of, it's like playing in the New York Philharmonic is a little like grand opera. You have to sort of project yourself in a different sort of perspective. When you're playing a small group, it's like you're singing a Schubert lieder to a small audience. You can sort of enunciate and speak sort of more intimately. Armando Gattala used to talk about this, playing the trumpet conversationally, like speaking like you and I right now, versus if you're speaking to a large body of people, you have to enunciate slower, you have to project yourself in a certain way. There's a real skill to that. And sometimes the players that are used to that have a hard time with speaking at a normal tone of voice. And trumpet being such a physical instrument, I think more than any other instrument has that dichotomy. It's like trumpet players have different metabolic levels of comfort. It's like a track athlete that a 100-meter sprinter will not be able to race 800 meters, and a 5,000-meter middle distance runner will not be able to race the 400 meters. They're just not, these are great athletes who can run any distance faster than the vast majority of the population. But at that level of, say, the Olympic level, it's very particular. You're pretty much good at one event. And trumpet players, a great trumpet player can play most everything on the trumpet better than most. But as you rise up in the echelon of performing groups, it gets very particular. So you'll have a phenomenal player who sort of only plays second, or you'll have to see examples of that.
Well, not just positions, but even like principal or second or whatever. But thinking there's no other instrument in the orchestra, right? We play B flat, C, D, E flat, piccolo, flugelhorn, cornet, and of course, and rotary. And of course, now these days, the natural trumpets are starting to creep in to more and more of the orchestras. I mean, there's no other musicians really in the orchestra that have to be that good on so many different instruments. I mean, they're all trumpet. I get it, right? And they're all going to argue. You're still just blowing through the little end,
Yeah.
But
Well, what I mean, no instrument is the hardest. They're all hard in different ways. We don't have any of the technical considerations that any of the woodwinds have. Nothing close. We don't have any of the fingering dexterity that strings have or woodwinds. We don't have the insecure partial system that the French horns deal with. The trombone has to move a bigger distance between notes than any other instrument. A valve going down 3/4 of an inch versus someone moving their slide 8 inches a foot even. But there's one thing that trumpet is by far the most strenuous instrument. And these are things that have been tested in laboratories. In fact, the second most strenuous instrument is the oboe, actually more than the other brass instruments. So trumpet is the only instrument where people can physically damage themselves in a traumatic sense. In other words, hernias are not rare. There are other injuries that can happen that are trauma injuries. Now, oboes have a slight history of that. Now and then you'll run into an oboist with a neck hernia. Once you're past that, almost every injury is an overuse injury, which are serious. I mean, they're very serious and very, very problematical, but they're not traumatic. It's not a tissue ripping. It's not a nerve getting severed. So we're like the sprinters of a track team, like where the hamstring can sprain, Achilles tendon can be ripped, versus a middle or long distance runner where it's just overuse. Eventually you can get tendonitis or things like that.
Well, and so even more reason to convince young students to really develop a good routine. And I try to explain that routine doesn't mean doing exactly the same thing every day, but you take care of all the things you need to take care of on a daily basis. But how important that is to not just jump in, and that you're really focused with it, so you don't end up injuring yourself.
Yeah, absolutely, very wise.
Yeah. Well, and that you sound good, right? I mean, that's really the goal, is not to not get hurt. It's to sound good on a consistent basis, right?
And you have to often do so when you're not feeling well.
Yeah.
I have one funny studio story I've told a few times. I had a rec. Back those days we had beepers. And you get a. And I got a call, a thing to go in, and it was a movie called Primary Colors. I think it starred John Travolta eventually, and it was a book by someone anonymous, but it was ostensibly about the governor when President Clinton was running for governor of Arkansas. So it was a book. I never read it, but I've heard that that's the story. But anyway, I remember that week I really had a banged up lip. I mean, I was just really hurting. Playing the trumpet was difficult, and I was just trying to get through every day. It passed quickly, but that day was rough. And I remember I showed up early to the session because I wanted to get there and get the lowest trumpet part. And I remember I was there alone in the studio and looking through and I got a call from the booth, like a contractor was in there with, with the engineer, and said, "Chris, can you come in here?" Usually when they do that, it means they have something special for you to play. So I think to myself, oh no. And I walk in there and he says, today we're going to be recording a bunch of brass band music, but what we need everyone to do is sound like they can barely play. We want it to sound very rustic like that. And he's saying, I know this is a lot to ask, but we're actually asking you to sort of sound bad. And he says, you think you're going to be able to handle this? I was like, yeah, I can handle it. And I remember, and that's what we did. And I remember walking out that day saying to myself, something is going to fall and hit me in the head because I just got away with something. So, the karma is so much, I have to pay this back. So,
Well, on a similar note, Hal Leonard does their recording for concert band and marching band and jazz band here in Indianapolis.
Uh-huh.
And I get to be in on a lot of the sessions, but those marching band sessions, it's like, okay, let's record, and you're like, well, should we make it sound like, the bands are going to make it sound when they play it. We don't want to play it too good, right?
Right.
But
Right. Yeah.
uh,
I always thought of the Jamie Aersol, when I was a student, we all practiced with those Jamie, back then they were LPs, and then you'd go out and play a club date or something. And, you'd practice and it would be like Mickey Roker on drums and Harold Mayburn on piano. It would be like this world-class rhythm section you'd practice with, and then you go, yeah, it was funny.
Another comment over here, Ryan Nottingham. Ryan is a trumpet player friend of mine down in Louisville, Kentucky. And his question, how do you help students uncover their events? And he's got that in quotation marks. You must have said something about events earlier on. I don't recall. Ryan, if you're still there, what do you mean by that? We'll keep going while he fills that in. But so what's a typical day look like for you right now? You're teaching, you're performing, you're doing everything still, right? But maybe virtually?
Yeah, well, typical nowadays, yeah. I have a heavy teaching load right now. I mean, it's actually quite heavy. I'm busy with other things, like this week particular, I have a committee I'm chairing that's very active, observing things. I've got to write in the next few days. Got to write a pretty long report. Performing. It's more like kind of quasi recording for virtual presentations. A few weeks ago, an orchestra I play with here in Washington, D.C. was putting out a chamber live stream concert, and they had asked me to do two pieces, which was on the most recent solo CD I did, which was called Moonmarked. One of the pieces called Acquainted with a Night by a young composer named Alistair Coleman, and sort of trumpet and piano. And then the other piece was Moonmarked by Carson Kumon, a composer from Boston, for clarinet and trumpet, which I recorded with my wife Suzanne. And this was to be filmed and recorded nowadays with the indoor mask mandates here in Maryland, you must keep a mask on indoors in a public space. And I was in there's a big TV crew there and recording people. It was a really well produced event, but we had to keep our masks on right till when we played. And I was in the building a good hour ahead of time. And then it's okay, now Chris, it's your time to record the piece for piano, and no real chance to warm up at all. And everything, and it's basically live. There's almost no opportunity to edit. I mean, they could do a tiny bit if you really needed to, but it came out phenomenally well. And so I felt very fortunate about that. But it was that's a different experience, and we all in this pandemic, we all have our various tales to tell in this way. And that was a very unique kind of experience, doing that sort of recording, which is going to be seen by very, very many people, and absolutely playing it pretty cold. Now a piece I've done a lot and recorded and felt very comfortable playing. I had a phenomenal pianist to play with, not the pianist I recorded with, but another one, Elizabeth Hill, she was fantastic. And then Moonmark for clarinet trumpet, which is a good 6.5 minute piece, nonstop. But a beautiful piece in a lot of ways. And Suzanne and I had done that a lot. So that went very well. And Suzanne had the same pressures on her to have the mask off until the downbeat, basically. So I'm getting away from your question. I'm busy.
Yeah.
We all are, but as we all are eagerly hoping that there will be live concerts again. Yeah.
Ryan chimed back in down here. He says, referencing the conversation, was talking about specialties within the profession. It seemed that there were comparisons drawn between specialists in athletic events and specialists in the upper echelons of music performance. How do you help students discover their specialties? Oh,
that's a great question. And I also not sure I was all that clear in what I was expressing. I think that I think actually students, I know I felt this way. You should try to do as much as you can different, and actually your your niche will probably be chosen by the people that are asking you what to do. You know, I hate to say that, but very few of us end up doing what we might have intended to when we were young. But you practice, you work hard, and things evolve where you're more comfortable in one situation than another, and then you get to be, you know, needed in that regard. So I would actually respectfully maybe advise not tell a student what they should be doing. I mean, they should do everything, not everything, but just try to get as good as you can get, and let it get sorted out. I mean, play everything as I remember when I was in Eastman and a young, I would never say no to anything. I mean, play everything, and it'll get sorted out. If you, I mean, it's a tough business. There's always going to be more people who are out there than there are jobs. But that's true in every profession, and there are professions where it's worse than music, believe it or not. So
I can't imagine what that would be, but
but if you are a really good player, people will eventually want to hear you. You know, so I've taught for so many years now, and I could fill a book up with names of students that have gone on to very successful careers and in very widely diverse areas of music. And you know, someone who's a phenomenal jazz improviser and very active in that, I'll remember, you know, us working on Brant etudes, and you know, and someone who's dedicated to orchestral playing. Well, I'm going to want to know that they can play third trumpet in a bassy chart and, you know, not hold the group back, you know. So I don't like the idea of someone being sort of a jack of all trades, but I think, you know, it would be sad if someone at a young age decided, well, this is all I'm going to do, you know. That's hard for me to put in words, I guess.
yeah, I remember being well, not young, but younger, and somebody would call. I was doing a lot of weddings and receptions,
Mhm.
and the only thing I ever said no to because I knew I simply couldn't pull it off was they wanted a country band.
Mhm.
Right? I mean, there's no way I could do that. But I remember the first call I got was, "Can you put together a jazz combo?" Yeah, you bet. You know, I didn't have a combo. You know, so I put one together as quick as I could. But uh, being able to know your limits, right? I knew that I couldn't do country, and if they had asked for R&B or something like that, I would have said no. But I think I like what you said. You know, get them to try a little bit of everything, right? Maybe we can all hopefully at this level, right? We can all perform. We can go in and play classical, a little bit of. We can swing when we need to swing, but that might not be our forte. Is that where you make your bread and butter? That's bad. Is that where you make your money?
Well,
Playing bebop or going right. And I know the answer is probably no.
right. I mean, I've played a lot of jazz, and I've recorded with, you know, Wayne Shorter and Pharoah Sanders and a lot of people, and
I
I've been
stand
heavily
corrected.
involved. But you know, yeah. I mean, when you hear Winton burn Cherokee down at quarter equals 350, no, that's another area. And I think, you know, but still, I want to keep my mind open to everything. You know,
Mhm.
I think, I don't know. It's maybe it's just language we're using. I mean, so I encourage people to get out there and play, including I mean, I've done country. I've toured with Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers, and you know, of course that's a kind of a commercial. You're playing a
Sure.
chart. You know, it's not the same as putting together a country band, but
Right.
it's I wouldn't want to close the door on anything
Yeah.
myself. You know.
Well, I went through the drum corps ranks years ago, and for a long time, I would tell students, don't do drum corps. But, so much has even changed there that now you can get a pretty good pedagogical experience, right? I mean, everything. Well, and now they're on 3-valve B flat instruments too, so that
Yeah,
makes
and
it
you see someone like Chris Martin, who
right.
was, yeah, pretty amazing.
Yeah. So, I mean, you got to spend an awful lot of money to spend a summer with, well, and his brother Mike, I think, works with Cavaliers, So, yeah, if you can get that kind of experience with those guys, sure.
So you also don't want to spread yourself thin and get physically worn out. This is a great question that you fielded there, and I have like no answer to tell you. I'm sorry.
Way to go, Ryan.
There isn't an answer. I mean, I think everyone has
Yeah.
to live their life and do what they can and try not to get hurt. And
Yeah. Well, you're teaching where right now?
University of Maryland. That's when I left New York. It was in 1998 because I was offered the professorship here. And one thing I realized, I had young kids at home, and in New York, you don't really have professors of instrument. I mean, there's so many players. So all the faculty at these schools are basically adjuncts. You're paid per lesson. And I know that some people have sort of special deals made up, but I didn't really understand what being a professor meant. And when it was like explained to me, and I looked really into it, it seemed like a great opportunity. And I've had others like that and others since then, but I've been very grateful to Maryland. Maryland is and I'm also not that far from New York, and I've done work, run up there and done, recordings with people but yeah, I'm at University of Maryland, which is a great university, and we have a very good school of music. It's a small school of music. It's actually smaller than many conservatories, and I've had a number of really phenomenal students come out of there.
This has been great. I can't believe an hour has already flown by here, but for everybody that checked in and listened and asked some questions, Ryan, Akira, thank you guys for checking in. Chris, hang on just a second. I'm going to wrap things up here, and once I go off the air, we'll finish up. But thanks to everybody out there for checking in tonight and listening to Chris. And just a reminder that James Thompson's interview came out this morning on the podcast platform, also on the studioHFL YouTube channel. Next week, episode 99 with Bria Schoenberg comes out. The week after that, episode 100 with Wayne Bergeron. And that is also the week that Rex Richardson is live with me. So some other great events coming up later this month. Chris, thank you so much for being here tonight. I really appreciate it. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
And, look forward to having a cup of coffee or another beverage with you at some point, hopefully in the near future. So, all right, everybody, have a great night. Again, appreciate you for being here. And